Minnesota Twins say goodbye to Edouard Julien, trading him to the Colorado Rockies, and why it's another cautionary tale for the team.
You are Locked On Twins, your daily Minnesota Twins podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to Locked On Twins. I'm CJ Baumgartner, new host of the show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. We got show number 1 in the books yesterday, so how do we find stuff for show number 2? Edouard Julien getting traded to the Colorado Rockies. We're going to talk about that and why it's a cautionary tale for the team, and some offseason storylines and where number 5 sits with a free agent signing that's really going to help the Twins in the lineup. Plus, we take a look at some potential bullpen options and why it's going to be pretty slim pickings from here on out. They may got to look inward. We're going to talk about all that, but we got to start off with the big news of the day. The Minnesota Twins trade Edouard Julien and Pearson Old to the Colorado Rockies for Jace Kaminska and cash considerations. And, you know, there's a lot of full things to break down with the trade, but I think where we got to start is just Edouard Julien and where his fall from grace started. So if you remember, in 2023, he was knocking on the door of the majors in spring training. And in fact, there was an article about him where Carlos Correa is quoted as saying, "My God, that guy can hit." Like, he was kind of seen as this guy that's going to come in and be the Twins starting second baseman for a long time. Got a little bit of a stint in 2023, then came back up kind of midway through the year and just didn't give up the job. And he had an OPS a weighted runs created plus of 134 in 2023, had a couple big postseason hits, and really just as somebody that the Twins fan base really did glom onto and like. And then in 2024, things started to fall off a little bit. So again, he had an OPS in 2023 of over 800. He had a 381 on base percentage. And then you move in to 2024 and 2025, where he has a 292 and 309 on base percentage, respectively. Same with the 79 and 81 weighted runs created plus. Now, again, in layman's terms, weighted runs created plus, 100 is league average. And so you can kind of see the big drop off in that production. And basically with Julien, it's a couple different things. On his personal level, his patience became passiveness. He was a guy that was known for not swinging at pitches that are out of the strike zone, which is a good quality to have and something that every little league coach is going to appreciate. But the problem with that became he just wouldn't swing at strikes. And the amount of times it became a meme on Twins Twitter of basically like Edouard Julien takes another strike 3 looking right down the pipe. And there's that line between, we get it, you want to be deliberate, you want to swing at your pitch, but at the same time, you're down 1-2 in the count. You kind of got to defend the plate a little bit. It's just something Julien was never quite able to figure out. And on top of that, you know, if you look at the way he was hitting the ball, it's not necessarily that, you know, his exit velocity was down and this was down, whatever. It's he was making okay contact. The problem is things just ended up going in the dirt a little bit, and he just wasn't able to, you know, it kind of just blurs into one another when you're not quite swinging at the pitches you always should be. You're being a little too passive, and then you don't really make do on the pitches that you're supposed to be hitting or that you think you're supposed to be hitting. It's really not a great sign. So 15% walk rate in 2023, and then that went down in 2024 to an 11%, and then a 10.6% walk rate. So teams realized you can just pound the strike zone on Ed Julien, and there's a good chance he's going to give you one right down the gun or something along those lines. And it morphed into then when he was trying to make contact, he was turfing too many balls, had just a too high of a ground ball rate, and didn't really give himself a chance to hit the ball in the air. Home runs didn't really end up matriculating more than the Twins thought they would. And so basically this all combined to when the Twins had no bodies at the end of the 2025 trade deadline, when there was nobody there, he didn't play. And now granted, Luke Keyshaw came back around that same time, but Keyshaw didn't play every day. And it kind of says something that Keyshaw came up and immediately took Julien's spot, and the Twins didn't even really bother trying to find a different way to get Julien in. And he was a limited defender. He played second base, but basically because that was the only spot where the team trusted him playing. They tried him at first a little bit, didn't work. And if the guy isn't hitting, you don't really want to waste the DH spot on him for production. So the Twins just got in a real bind with Julien, and he never really played at the end of the 2025 season when the Twins had nobody of major league caliber, barely, that was in that lineup. And that was kind of the telling sign that things were over for Julien in Minnesota. The other thing is he doesn't have any options remaining. So if he doesn't make the big league roster, the Twins have to put him on waivers anyways. You have a little bit more leverage before spring training kicks off. So see if a team wants him. Colorado took a bite, and it'll be interesting to see Julien in Colorado, because if he can elevate the ball a little bit, he may be able to have some success, but we'll just have to see. But overall, this gets to a bigger point with the Minnesota Twins, which has been their development problem. It's been an issue for the team, and Julien's not the only one, by the way. And in fact, we have to look at another guy who had a really, really good rookie year, early start, and then burned bright and burned out pretty quickly. And that's Jose Miranda. Jose Miranda was a darling in AAA in 2021, hit all those doubles and homers, came up in 2022 and had some big hits. And even though he faded off in September, still put together a really solid first year in the majors. Was hurt in 2023. That impacted him. But then in 2024 and in 2025, the results just weren't there. And it was a guy who, again, like Julien, was hitting too many ground balls, couldn't find a way to get high exit velocity, and was just a guy that the team had to punt on. And the Twins couldn't even get anything for Miranda. They just had to outright release him. And now I believe he's with the San Diego Padres on a minor league deal. But the point is that's been an issue. And it's not just Jose Miranda either. We have to look at the biggest one of them all in Royce Lewis, who came out in his first couple seasons and was destroying baseballs, even though he played in just a handful of games in 2022 and even 2023. When he was on the field, he was impactful. And even early in 2024, and then all of a sudden it just fell off a cliff. And it's felt like the more games he's played, the worse he's gotten. He had an 85 weighted runs created plus last year, did Royce Lewis. And overall, it's just one of those things of, again, a guy who comes up, has early success, and as soon as major league pitching coaches, as soon as major league pitchers know how to attack a player, the Twins haven't been able to find that counterpunch. And we've seen it happen with Julien. We've seen it happen with Miranda. Royce Lewis is there, and the Twins have Brooks Lee, who hasn't quite burned as bright as those other guys, but is still a top 10 draft pick, still somebody who was a top prospect in the Twins system. And Lee is going to need to be able to hit, because he's not going to be a highly rated defensive shortstop. He's going to need to be able to perform well with the bat in his hands. And the Twins under Falvey have had an issue getting hitters to take that next step and find that counterpunch at the big league level. And this is why it's triply important, is because the Twins have a wave of hitters coming up through the minors. Emmanuel Rodriguez is knocking on the door, and a good chance we see him at some point in the majors in 2026. A big swing and power guy that will miss a lot of bats. So it's going to be important that you make sure that the development plan for him is locked on and solid. And the other thing is the golden goose, which is Walker Jenkins, top 5 prospect overall, according to Baseball America, top Twins prospect, and the best Twins prospect, according to some, since Byron Buxton. So this is a guy who you need to make sure you get this right, because the Twins, I think, are banking on some of those guys coming up and performing well and kind of giving this team a shot in the arm from the lineup. But again, long-term for this franchise, Walker Jenkins is kind of your up-and-coming face of the franchise superstar. You know, if you botch that the way that you're potentially botching Royce Lewis, things could get pretty hairy in a hurry. So there's a lot of things that the Twins have to think about now as they move on from post-Julien. Look, players wash out all the time, right? So just because Julien washed out doesn't mean that everything the Twins do is wrong or bad, or they got to fire somebody or whatever. That's just part of baseball. Some guys come up, have a nice little 2-year career, and then kind of fall off, and that's just the nature of the game. Development is non-linear. All of that stuff is true. So I don't just want to use this to like throw stones at the Twins for 2 minutes, but it is to say that there is a pattern. We've seen it with Jose Miranda. We saw it with Ed Julien, and we're potentially seeing it right now with Royce Lewis, Brooks Lee. And it's scary because if they don't figure it out or find some way to at least get it close to something passable, you got some top prospects that everybody's really worried about, that you just want to make sure that you can put them in the best positions when you get to the major league. So that is, again, something that the Twins are going to need to figure out. Julien just wasn't long for this team. If there's just one way to kind of wrap it all together, put a bow on it, he wasn't long for this team. And now the Twins have a 40-man roster spot coming up, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes here, about what the Twins could potentially do with that open 40-man roster spot. Pearson Ole was also thrown in on the trade. He was already designated for assignment, so the Twins took him off when they added Rogers. So he's already somebody that was going to lose anyways. I see him as a throw-in piece in that deal. Had a couple nice outings for the Twins, but overall had an ERA of over 5 and got a 5-pitch mix, things like that. It'll be interesting to see again how that plays at Coors, but overall, we'll talk about kind of the return the Twins got in the trade tomorrow and just some of the intriguing things that he could be, not this year's bullpen, but potentially in the future. He's more of a lottery ticket, but there's a couple different things we can look at that guy. He missed all of last year to Tommy John, so there's not a ton of recent stuff, but we'll take a deeper dive in tomorrow as well. But the Twins have to figure out how they can nullify this or rectify this for the future, because they got some top prospects coming up. Just got to make sure, as just a pure baseball fan, as a pure Twins fan, I want to see Walker Jenkins come up and rake. So just making sure to figure out what happened and how they can rectify that will be the biggest thing. Hey, coming up again, we're going to talk about things that the Twins can do to rectify the bullpen and how their options are running thin. Maybe even got to look internally. Top 5 moments of the offseason. We start off with number 5. That's coming up later, and how a veteran added to the Twins lineup can certainly help this team get through and try and take the next step. That's all coming up right after this. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. And this year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress of guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connected online. They handle everything from W-2s to self-employment forms and work to get you every deduction. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right in the TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver and gives you a real peace of mind knowing an expert is handling it. And for a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in. If a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year, just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit turbotax.com/local to book your appointment today. Hey, thanks for making Locked On Twins your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you haven't already, go check out our new Everydayer Club. It's access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Twins, compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app. Go to lockedontwins.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. Minnesota Twins got to figure out what they need to do with the bullpen, because Taylor Rogers, as we talked about on the show yesterday, and go back and listen to that, we had a discussion on how he could be the new Caleb Thielbar and take in that role and do what he needs to do and become that first lefty out of the pen. The problem is, and I said it on yesterday's show, is that if Rogers is your only big bullpen addition, your bullpen is got a lot of potential to be in rough shape. And that's no disrespect at Rogers. It's just not going to put him in a position that's really favorable to what his skill set is at this point in his career. But the free agent pool is pretty thin, and I've looked over a few examples. Again, there's a lot of different angles the Twins could attack how they want to address the bullpen from a major league free agent position. And again, there is a 40-man roster spot open if the Twins wanted to sign a free agent. And just looking at some, again, these aren't all the options. I'm not saying these are the top guys, but again, here are some options the Twins could go after. Rafael Montero, who was with the Tigers last year, mid-90s fastball, really good underlying metrics when you look at just kind of his overall stuff, but league average in strikeouts despite that, and an alarmingly high walk rate that's probably keeping teams away. Like, that dude's walk rate, I think, is like 20%. The league average is like 8%. So it's, or something along those lines. It's not necessarily the one that you'd want to stake your claim as like, this guy will be our closer. Paul Sewald, somebody who's been a closer, has experience with that, with the Diamondbacks, who's with the Mariners, and I believe is with the Tigers as well. Closer experience, but right shoulder strain kept him out to just only 22 games last year that he pitched in, and he had a +4 ERA in back-to-back seasons, is getting older. Again, if we're talking about addition to a just kind of a middle relief tier unit, not necessarily a bad lottery ticket for either of those two guys. But if you're looking for a high-end, high leverage, eighth inning, runners on second and third, up by one, slam the door and get us to the ninth inning, there's not a lot of options that are on this list. David Robertson, who I basically think of as reliever Rich Hill, probably something there because he just continues to pitch and pitch and pitch and pitch. But I mean, he's 41, or it's the age thing. And the fact that, like Rich Hill, that guy knows that, like, I only have a limited amount of gas in the tank. And if I can wait and sign with the team as late as can be, then I'm not really going to push it. And there's a chance that the Twins want something a little more immediate. But those are kind of some of the options. And again, the Twins love to go out and sign a player that nobody saw coming and put them in a position that nobody saw coming. And maybe Taylor Rogers is that guy, but there are some issues with the free agent relievers that are left. And in the trade market, we'll just go trade for a high leverage reliever. And I look through, who are some guys that the Twins aren't going to trade for rentals. If they're going to trade for a bullpen arm, it's probably going to be somebody who, especially a high leverage role, somebody who has multiple years of team control. And there's just not a lot of guys out there that teams are willingly going to give up. And this is the biggest thing that I like to say when it comes to making a trade or a playoff run or whatever it is. Other teams have agency. To use a Vikings perspective, for example, will the Vikings trade for Joe Burrow? That'd be awesome. But why would the Bengals want to give up Joe Burrow? That doesn't make any sense. And so the same thing is for the Twins. The Twins are like, we want to go trade for a high-end closer. And other teams will go, why would we trade a high-end closer? We love our high-end closer. And even teams that aren't going to be competitive this year, let's say like a Sacramento A's or something like that, or whatever the heck they call themselves now, wants to trade their equivalent of their new Mason Miller like they did to the Padres. But you remember, that trade happened at the trade deadline. And if you're a team with a closer, you want to get value out of that reliever and have them pitch for your team. And who knows? And if the team themselves aren't in contention by the trade deadline, you just trade them to the next team. And you'll still have just as good amount of leverage for a reliever at the trade deadline as you do in the winter. It's better for teams that are getting that veteran arm to put at the high end of their bullpen in the winter because they can use them the whole year. But teams are way more desperate to trade for them at the trade deadline when a bunch of teams have relievers that are injured and everybody could use an extra bullpen arm at the trade deadline and things like that. So there is no leverage position for these other teams to trade for the Twins either. Again, unless the Twins are trading for some diamond in the rough, which is probably more likely anyways, but it's just hard to see who stands out on paper as somebody like the Twins need to go get, which makes it feel like the Twins are going to have to look internally for their next option. They're going to need to look at a Marco Raya. They're going to need to look at a Connor Prelip. And this is where, there's some, people have thrown around David Festa. People have thrown around some other names here and there as guys that could be in the bullpen. And overall, I just really want to use this as a second to talk about why, I don't want to go into full numbers breakdown, but I really do feel like Connor Prelip is just such a prime candidate to go to the bullpen. Dude has electric stuff. Dude's got, a 3-pitch mix that was really well, but he didn't pitch a ton at Alabama because he got hurt. And that's unfortunate, and it's not his fault. But there's just not a lot of innings there. The Twins still took a chance on him after, the injuries because he had such great stuff. And he showed that in the minors and then got hurt. So you have a pitcher who's got electric stuff, but injury issues. And those are just two things that usually mean a starter to go to the bullpen. That's exactly what happened with Joan Duran, by the way. He was a starting prospect up until like 2 weeks before the 2022 season actually started. And again, the lockout probably played a little bit into timing and things like that of the position switch. But also the Twins went into spring training, gave him every opportunity to be a starter, but also kind of definitely sort of totally steered him in the direction of you should be the team's closer. And that's how you're going to make the big league team and get the big league raise coming out of the season. Because you remember, Duran always was like, yeah, I'd like to start again. I'd like to start again. And not that it was ever confrontational, but it's always just a, yeah, I'd like to start if it works out. Players want to start. Pitchers want to be starters typically, and they make more money as a starter than as a reliever. But Duran was able to turn himself into one of the best, if not the best closers in baseball over his Twins tenure. And I think Connor Prelip, while not an exact one-to-one comparison, I think certainly has a smaller pitch mix that you could really lean into. You could get the most out of his stuff. Instead of having to throw 70 to 100 pitches every 5 days, how about throw 15 to 20 pitches a couple times a week and give max effort? And I think that's really the biggest way that the Twins can figure out their bullpen issues. And again, it's not going to completely fix everything because the Twins need multiple, like more than one, high-end relievers, guys that you trust. And Duran was special. And to think that Duran is just going to fall in our laps again, not that it's impossible. And I think the Twins have shown with Duran and even Griffin Jacks and Brock Stewart that they do know how to get the most out of relievers if they have the talent. But that being said, just to assume that that'll happen, I'm not going to quite do that because you know what they say about assuming. So, but I really do like Prelip's mix. I really do like what Prelip can do. And I think he's the prime candidate, not just to be a reliever, but I think one that the Twins will trust in high leverage situations. So we got plenty of time as we're closer and closer to spring training to talk about, Prelip specifically, or a Marco Raya or something like that. Marco Raya, just again, another arm that probably going to be a little bit better fit once he gets out of the rotation. And again, the Twins rotation is so deep. You can look at a Raya, you can look at a Prelip, and you can say, guys, we want you to make the big league team, but we already have Lopez, Ryan, Ober, Woods Richardson, and let's just say Zebby Matthews taking the final 5 spots, or Mick Abel, or, pick the one you want, Taj Bradley. All right. So, and then there's again, there's a lot of names that are in front of you. So it's either spend the whole season in AAA trying to be a starter, or you can make the big league team right out of spring training if you want to be our primary 7th inning setup man or something along those lines. If you're those guys, you want to get to the show, it's a big pay bump when you get to the big leagues. They're probably not going to turn that down and get in that position. So we'll have to see. Duran is an example. Louis Varland is an example. If you want to go way, way back, Glenn Perkins is an example of a starting pitcher who didn't quite work out, moved to the bullpen, and became an all-star. So it happens a lot. Almost every good reliever was a starting prospect that they just said, hey, instead of trying to sustain yourself for 5+ innings, how about you go max effort and try and figure things out that way? So that's essentially what the Twins could do in the path for Connor Prelip or Marco Raya or David Festa, or, pick a name. There's a lot of different things. And again, we'll see how it plays out. If that happens, by the way, the Twins would not announce it probably until the beginning of the season anyways. You'd want to at least give the player a fair shake as a starter in spring camp, see how he looks, and then kind of when it gets down to it, be like, you want to make the big league team or not? And that could potentially be what happens. We're going to wrap up things today by going through number 5 of the top 5 offseason storylines, offseason moments for the Minnesota Twins, and why number 5 will be a big boost to raising the floor of the Twins lineup. That's all coming up right after this. Once again, CJ Baumgartner, new host of Locked On Twins here. Give me a follow on X at BombCJ30 as we get ready to grow this show, and I'm looking forward to growing it with you. So give me a follow at BombCJ30 on X as we start to get more and more Twins content with spring training just a couple weeks away from pitchers and catchers reporting. And that means we got a lot of offseason talk to catch up on as well. And I thought we'd do this by just kind of using this last segment of the day to try and go through the Twins' top 5 moments of the offseason and kind of just catch up on the main beats and just kind of get everything back up. And you know where I'm at. You kind of get some Twins content here on kind of the things that have been going on over the last few months. And I think we need to start off with one of the first dominoes of the Twins offseason. And number 5 on my list is Josh Bell signing with the Minnesota Twins. He's probably more of a DH than a first base. As I was looking into the numbers, I did a piece for Zone Coverage. And again, go to zonecoveragemn.com. I have some pieces up there. Again, I have one talking about Rogers and Thielbar. I had one talking about the Twins' first base situation and more. So go give them, go over to their website and look at that, and also the great writers that they have over there. They do a great job. Everybody else putting stuff out there. But I talked about the Twins' 3 signings: Rhys Hoskins potentially, Josh Bell potentially. And when you looked at those options, I kind of was like, I'm probably leaning more towards Hoskins. He's got a more proven track record. But the thing about Josh Bell is, and Hoskins can play a little bit better defense, but the thing about Josh Bell is he's a hitter, man. Everywhere he goes, he has never had a season where he's had an OPS of like under 700. Which doesn't seem like a super high bar to clear, but it's just the sense of like, even in that guy's down years, he is still a very productive major league hitter. He's used to playing in small markets. He's played in Pittsburgh. He's played in Washington, and he's kind of a guy that I'll sign with the team for a 1-year deal. I'll play with them. I'll produce. I'll get a lot of playing time. And then all of a sudden I'll get traded at the deadline and we'll see what's happening. So Josh Bell, I just think overall gives the Twins just such a big boost in the lineup for what the Twins can do, because it fills out that DH role. You can potentially platoon him at first base with Cody Clemens, because Bell is a right-handed hitter, does hit lefties, although he didn't quite hit them great last year, but his career numbers against lefties have been pretty good enough that you could platoon him with Cody Clemens. Cody Clemens can face righties, Bell can face lefties, and then Bell could also slide into DH at times as well. I wouldn't really trust Josh Bell as a first baseman. Very not great defensively. And I know everybody thinks of the Moneyball line. Anybody can play first base. And while that is true, anybody can play first base. To play defensively at a high level is something that the movie just kind of glosses over as defense is unimportant. And I get it's a movie, they're making a point. But, try having your shortstop dive for a ball in the hole, have to come up firing, and the throw is not going to be great, but can your first baseman finish the play and make that pick or go get that ball, make the stretch, all that kind of stuff, where I think Bell will be limited in that defensively. But I really do love the hitting, and I think defensive warts are there, but I think Twins fans will really appreciate the hitting. This guy's not going to be an MVP caliber hitter. The Twins signed him for a 1-year, $9 million contract. It's not that deep, but he can just be a nice veteran bat. And that's something that the Twins were missing, just proven big league hitters. Because you look around the lineup, you have Byron Buxton, proven big league hitter. Ryan Jeffers, proven big league hitter. And after that, where are we at? Like, Royce Lewis has his issues. We talked about that earlier. Brooks Lee has his issues. We talked about that earlier. Luke Keyshaw, really fun. But again, first-year player going into his second season. So Cody Clemens, really fun career year last year. Can he sustain that? So a lot of different factors when you look into the Twins outfield as well. Matt Wallner had some moments. Can he keep it up? Trevor Larnach has been okay, but not great. And the Twins are just desperate for somebody who can raise the floor of this team's hitting level. And I think Josh Bell certainly establishes a floor of a player who constantly puts up OPSs of 750. And I kind of use, I don't know quite what the right league average is off the top of my head, but I like to use a 750 OPS, which is on base plus slugging. 750 is kind of that number of, if you're 750 or above, you're like an average to above average major league hitter. 700 is okay. You're kind of maybe in that, C range. If you look in a grading system, it's like a C minus. And then anything under 700 is like, you better be a really good defender, or this team, I don't know why this team is putting you out in the lineup. So, but Josh Bell has had a lot of success, really, really good seasons, putting it up with Washington and Pittsburgh and other teams. I really do think that this signing in isn't going to the Twins are going to be AL Central powerhouses now, but it certainly just puts you in a very good spot to try and compete, and at least to try and raise the floor of what this team can be. So that's pretty much it. He's a very, very consistent, durable player, has his issues fielding. The Twins fielding are going to have their issues. That'll be another thing to talk about as we get closer to opening day. But again, I just want to thank you for tuning in today to Locked On Twins, and we're going to break down tomorrow, again, moment number 4. We're going to take another look into the Ed Julien trade with the Twins pitcher they got back and how intriguing he could be. And if he's not going to come up next year, I still think he's got some promise. We're going to talk about that and more coming up. Also, where in the world will Luke Keyshaw play in 2026? Why I think it should just be second base. Why the Twins are going to maybe rove him around a little bit. Just make sure you subscribe and follow Locked On Twins so you can get all the latest episodes. Again, you can find me on X at BombCJ30. And remember, If you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Get Locked On Twins ad-free, plus members-only Discord access and more. Head to lockedontwins.supercast.com to join the club. For those of you on video, we now send you to the first ever 24/7 national Locked On Podcast Network YouTube channel. On audio, make sure your second listen is Locked On MLB. I'm CJ Baumgartner. See ya.